Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to another edition of the Developer Experience Office Hours here on OpenShift TV. I am Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV, and I am joined by several friends from Red Hat here. We're going to be talking about CodeReady Workspaces kind of in depth, and I would like to hand it off to David first. David, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi folks, I'm David Harris. So I'm the product manager for CodeReady Workspaces. I also look after a bunch of other tooling that we have for the inner loop experience. So yeah, it's great to be here. Have any questions, stick them in the chat. Be more than happy to answer them as we go.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Angel, you want to go?
My name is Angel Misevski. I'm a senior software engineer working on CodeReady Workspaces on Eclipse Che and stuff like that. So I work on the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, based up here in Toronto.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, not much more to add there.
I
have a very small window of focus, but it is on what we are demoing, unlike David, who touches many things.
Awesome. It's good to hear people from Toronto on the stream, because being here in Detroit makes me feel a little closer to the folks that I'm talking to. Awesome. So, CodeReady Workspaces. Or Ryan, did you want to introduce yourself since you keep popping in and out? I mean,
I'm going to be around in the chat, helping with questions, and in case I pop up later, I just want to say hi at the top of the show here.
Awesome.
Yeah, say hello in chat, folks, and I'll do my best to keep track of what the activity there.
Sounds good. So, CRW, it's awesome. Tell me more.
I think you've said all there is that needs to be said. We're done, right?
All right, we're done here. Out we go. Let me play the outro.
I can talk about it a bit. So CodeReady Workspaces, CRW, is basically a cloud IDE, where the idea is you're writing programs that you're running in a Kubernetes cluster and an OpenShift cluster. That's a different modality than running something locally on your computer, and so it makes some sense to have a way of developing things in that cluster, reusing the sort of concepts you're using to deploy, multiple services, multiple backends, and putting your development environment in the cluster to match sort of what you're dealing with in reality, rather than having your local setup, running a bunch of Docker containers and trying to network them together. So it's basically a way to simplify that setup, put everything together in a real easy way, and it give you a familiar sort of environment, but in a sort of different underlying system that it's running on. I don't know if you want to add anything, David.
Oh, that was good. I mean, yeah, there's kind of two key things to touch on. Like, one of the principles is that anyone with a browser can easily contribute code. So instead of you needing the high spec machine just to be able to run simple node web app, you can run everything in the clouds. It's really good for like open source projects in particular, where we kind of see people dipping in and out of a lot of different runtime stacks. And instead of having to have everything on your machine to deal with all of those different environments, you can just quickly click a link provided to you by that open source project, spins up a workspace, and you've got everything that you need in your browser. With some of Red Hat's more enterprise security concerned customers, this is also a way where you can not like enforce control, but you can kind of get that sense of what your development teams have access to, and be able to provide them everything they need in a very auditable way and keep everything off very hard to secure laptops.
Yeah, definitely. And what you're getting is the immutability of a Docker container for your environment. So your dependencies are all set. You define what you need to build your application, and everyone can immediately just grab it and start an IDE in it, basically. So that's the pitch overall, I would say.
Just to let the audience know, I'm dealing with a slightly sick dog today, so if you see me doing this, it's me trying to calm her down and everything. But yeah, so if it brings a unified experience to a group of developers, CodeReady Workspaces does. And it allows you to not have to have these various bespoke environments in which you can code. What does that enable for people and organizations?
It basically enables you to sort of get people started, onboard more quickly, and also, run into different situations and just kind of dive right into writing the code. Don't worry about setup. Don't worry about configuration. Don't worry about, here's the list of tools you need to install to build this project. Here's the build process. We kind of encapsulate everything from, you can have multiple containers running so that when your workspace starts up, it also starts up your database container, starts up a front end container if you're working on the back end, or a back end container if you're working on the front end. Basically, it's a one-click way of defining what your deployment looks like, and then starting that up so that you can kind of focus in on the part that you need while keeping in mind that there are related components you have to worry about. So, my application interacts with a database. Your onboarding doc is going to say, here's, deploy this database, here's the configuration for the database. Then you start up your program locally when you're debugging it or whatever. Here's how you connect to the database. And there's a lot of hoops to potentially jump through to get that working right. And there's some maintenance to keeping it running right if you're updating your system, stuff like that. I pretty consistently run into, why is my build broken now that I've updated to Fedora 34 or something like that. So things like that are what we want to avoid. So encapsulating basically the components that run your workspace, the components that run your application, the networking that sort of connects everything together, and also the sort of build logic of, what's the sequence you have to do things in? Do you have to start this and wait for it to be ready before starting another component, that sort of thing. And yeah, we'll talk about it more, I'm sure, in a bit, but it's all encapsulated in a single file that, you can just keep this YAML file that defines your entire development environment and just pass it into the program and get an identical environment. Practically for me, I work on the sort of Eclipse Che project, which is the upstream to CodeReady Workspaces. And we've got a large number of repos, all have different setups. Some of them I don't contribute to often, but when I do contribute, you need to install a bunch of linters, a bunch of tooling that is specific to that project. With sort of CodeReady Workspaces, what I can do is just feed that project's dev file that defines the workspace that you need for that, for the docs repo, for example. Feed that into CodeReady Workspaces and instantly have everything set up that I need. Click a few buttons to do the validations that are required, and just more easily write the code.
Awesome. So if I were a new developer getting started in an organization that was using CRW, or I'm an admin that's installing CRW, I guess, where do I kind of begin, right?
Yeah, so I mean, CRW, there's a number of ways to install it. I think the sort of mainline way you'd want to do it is it's just an operator. You can go to Operator Hub and just grab it and deploy it, and it should be pretty straightforward. Once it's up and running, then on OpenShift, at least with CRW, you log in with your OpenShift user. We're going through OpenShift OAuth. There's nothing to set up there. And that's about it. It comes with some samples that you can play around with, and then start diving into documentation and reading about how to set things up for yourself. We try to keep it pretty simple. But yeah, Operator is the mainline sort of way to install. There's other tooling. We have CRW CTL, which is a command line utility that you can use to deploy automatically on your cluster. I think there's probably links somewhere. I don't have them on hand right now.
I can find them. Don't worry. You keep talking. Yeah. I'll go find links.
Yeah. So those are the two sort of main ways to install it yourself. If you have, CRC running locally, or if you have access to a cluster. If you just want to try out the application, you just want to try CodeReady Workspaces out, not worry about it, not deal with any setup yourself. We also have a free service hosted at workspaces.openshift.com. You just sign in with, I think, your Red Hat developer ID, kind of pop in there, and you get a pretty decently provisioned environment where you can try out the samples, write your own thing, and start up a workspace, see how it works, see the architecture of the thing. You can also, go back to the OpenShift console, look at what's happening under the hood if you're interested in that. And yeah, the only downside of the workspaces .openshift.com is that it is sort of time limited. So after a couple of weeks, we kind of just wipe the account, and you can create a new one freely, but it's not intended to be your main workhorse for.
It should not be your permanent development environment.
Yes, it's not your permanent Bitcoin mining environment.
Right, that too. Which brings up the point.
So I was just going to say the advantage that we have there, though, is because we have a way of codifying the developer environment within the dev file, which I'm sure we'll look at later. It's very easy to kind of recreate and get started again once you have repositioned on Dev Sandbox.
Yeah, that's a good thing to mention that I'm kind of glossing over. So you define your workspace, and that's a portable sort of YAML file that you deploy it locally, or you recreate your account. You could just take that same YAML file and get the identical thing. You don't actually lose data in that sense. So as long as you're pushing to, GitHub and saving the dev file, you have no worries.
Yep. So first question, does CRW support plugins? I tried CRW with OpenShift Sandbox, but can't find from where to install the plugins.
Okay. Is this something that I should maybe share my screen for? Because we can kind of
let's dive in and go through the UI and everything. I mean, that we don't have to answer that question right this second, but we need to touch it, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. So let me see if I can get this running the way I expect it to. So switch over here. This is actually, oh no, the UI is the same. It's hard to distinguish them. So this is this is the CodeReady Workspace, the workspaces.openshift.com I was talking about. So it's the thing you would see. I have a few workspaces here, but the editor. So some background before we get into plugins. We support the Thea editor, which is based on Monaco, which is the same sort of basis for VS Code. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is support the VS Code extension API. So any extensions you might have from your local VS Code environment, you can just pretty easily import into a workspace here. So if we go through the get started, actually, let's do this way. This is a little easier to see. So we go from a template. Let's just pick out, I'm using Go a lot, so I'll go with that. So this is the dev file that I was talking about. This one is a little complicated because it includes some, here's how you build, here's how you run. Let me know if this text is too small. I can also zoom in a little bit more.
Yeah, let me know, audience, if you can't read it, and I'll happily ask them to zoom.
And so here's your debug configuration. You can see it's a VS Code launch. So a lot of the time, since we're using Monaco, you'll see that it looks a lot like, what you're used to if you're running VS Code. And a lot of the API is supported so that you can more easily port stuff over. The way plugins are added here is we have components. Kind of hard to see the wrapping on.
The audience requested you to
zoom in
a little more. There you go.
All right, there we go. So the wrapping on this is making it a little bit hard to read because the URLs can get a little long, but we have plugin elements to the sort of dev file structure. So here's my Go plugin, and you can see it's Golang Go latest. It used to be more clear that this was just exactly the VS Code Go plugin. So exactly what you're getting on VS Code is what we're going to start up in your workspace. Nice. The way we do this is we're running in Docker containers. You can't just grab the dependencies you need, but what we can do is start up a sidecar container that runs Go stuff, put the extension in there, and then remotely access it from Thea, which it's like VS Code split into multiple containers basically. The other thing we have here is the Docker image thing. So that's basically defining here's my build environment, here's my running environment. This is a pretty basic example. Let me see if let's just go to one I already have defined. Here's a good one. So this is one of our dog fooding dev files. So you can see we have the Go plugin. We have, we're defining, the dev container that has all my dependencies already there. I don't have to worry about getting the right Go version, anything like that. It has some endpoints, which are kind of useful there. And also starts up another container, which isn't used for development, but is used by the actual application we're developing as a backend. To add plugins, to finally get to the question that was asked, we come with a built-in list of plugins that we kind of maintain ourselves. So if you go into your actual, workspace details, you can hit these toggles. I can, do this, and next time I start it, it's going to have ASCII doc support. If for whatever reason you want to have both Go and Java and Node, you can do that. We can do the OpenShift connector. That'll start up with the OpenShift connector that you would use on VS Code. If the list that we have here isn't sufficient, if there's something that you're missing, the thing to keep in mind is that we do support, I think, most, if not all, of the VS Code extensions API. There's a few details where we'll hit some roughness, but it's easy to define your own plugin, especially if it's something like, there's, I think down here is the Zoom has broken the scroll to the bottom. So zooming a little bit past the limits of what's expected in the UI design, maybe. There's the YAML plugin, for example, doesn't have any dependencies. It just runs, you don't have to install anything to run that. So you can just take that v6 extension file and put it into, there's a format and all that, but you put it into your workspace and then you have that running. You can basically install VS Code extensions, is what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way.
Nice.
And there's another little detail I was going to say. Oh yeah, so the language support, like in VS Code, is provided through the language server protocol. So anything that you've got a language server for, that's what we're getting it from. Go is the Microsoft, I think. I can't remember if it's Microsoft or Google that builds the LSB for Go. But Java is the the JDK Java language server, stuff like that. So basically, when you're thinking of what do we support, it's VS Code. Stuff that you find there is generally going to be compatible over.
So two questions have popped up as a result of going through this demo here. One, kind of the every PM wants to know question: can we do it in dark mode?
Oh, I believe we can. I prefer light mode personally. So
right. I mean, everybody has their preference, right? Like a lot of people are used to the traditional.
It should be able to go in dark mode, but the thing I can offer as a consolation is if I actually go ahead and start up one of these workspaces, we have dark mode.
Right. Yeah. So it's
so
like
the actual editor
the
is in
admin
dark
part.
mode.
Yeah. And then so that leads kind of the next question is, what if I hate the font I'm looking at in the UI by default? Can I change that default font somehow?
Yeah, so you should be
sweet.
Actually, so I work on the back end stuff. I could be wrong on some of these details. I'm going to be open about that. I do not work on the Thea component of it. I work on the bits that start up pods in the background.
Sure.
It is, once this gets started, it's taking some time a bit of slowness on the cluster today, but once it gets started, you'll see that it's going to be very similar to VS Code. So you should be able to hit settings in the same way. The only issue I feel like you might run into is if, do you have these fonts installed? It's a browser, so how browsers handle fonts might be different, but I'm pretty sure you should be able to just set that. We can maybe give it a shot, see what happens. I haven't actually done that because I am personally fine with the font. I totally understand disagreement there. Yeah, here you can see a sort of running log of what's happening to actually get this running. Here it's loading, and in a moment, my network probably doesn't like streaming and also running CRC.
No, I will say that, yeah, if you have a somewhat limited upload, yeah, you're going to feel it.
Yeah, it's the joys of Canadian internet. I have great download, and then I think like 10 megabits up. So
yep. Yeah.
Perfect.
Five of that's being used for this right now.
Yeah, exactly. So as advertised, it's going to look like VS Code. We have our usual UI. I don't know why that's happening or that. So yeah, it's going to be like VS Code. So let's see what happens if we go into the preferences. Look up the old font editor. I wonder.
So there's
Font family. What's the preferred font? I suppose I probably have to have it installed. Hey?
Code is what was asked for. I've used Hack. I've used Julia. There's all kinds of ones.
I'm a Iosevka kind of guy. That's the really narrow one, but still monospace. See, the problem is that I don't remember the fonts I have installed on this machine, so I don't want to put in something that.
No worries. But yes, you can
change
the font, yes, whatever you want. And this does very much look exactly like the VS.
It's the underlying stuff is the same. You know, it's the same repo Monaco that's used at some point in VS Code. Their process is complicated, so what parts they replace, I'm not exactly sure, but the sort of soul of the thing is the same, and the contributions go both ways, right? We collaborate with Microsoft on their API. We contributed some of the first language servers for VS Code, and then they come back into, you know, Thea, CodeReady Workspaces, stuff like that.
So the audience is very curious. You're using the i3 window manager on what distro?
This is Fedora 33 right now.
Nice, awesome, thank you.
Yes, I considered cropping the share screen window to just cut off that little bottom bar.
That's fun, man. Come on.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
It's just more effective. I'm very happy that this pandemic has spurred all the sort of video meeting platforms to let me actually select a single monitor at a time. It used to just show ultra wide screen everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I appreciate it. One good thing came out of all this, and
the video conferencing tooling has advanced. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I don't know. Is there anywhere we want to go from here? We have a thing up and running. This is just a basic running. Demo.
I mean, there is one question that, you know, we could probably address now. I was saving for a little bit later, but Rapscallion Reeves, regular viewer, would love to know if it's possible to have like a test instance, right? Like, so some kind of automation around CRW, right? Like create a dev file that pulls from Git, spin it up locally, and get like a successful like health check or status code or whatever. And then like that way you can do some testing kind of automatically, right? Like, does this run, enter kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a use case I've sort of experimented with. What we try to go for in general is enough flexibility to do what you need. If I just stop this one up and go back to over here, let's see if this is configured in a way that makes sense for talking about this. Yeah, so basically this is maybe an example of what you're talking about. I'm not sure if I'm getting the exact sort of concept, but this dev file for the plugin broker, which is one of the things that helps start up workspaces, we define this plugin registry. This is the registry that the plugins are getting installed from. This is what defines sort of what container you get when you're installing, you know, the Go plugin, for example. And this is just an image. We're gonna, when we, fingers crossed that I didn't break this at some point in the recent times. When we start up this workspace, what it's going to do is it's going to start up that image, and it's just going to run. It's not idling. It's basically serving plugins from within my workspace. You could, in a similar way, have a container that runs tests. You could have, you know, we don't have the logic for easily defining what running a test looks like, but if you have a container, you can set the, you know, command for it to, you know, make test, however you define your testing platform, and it will just run. A few sort of minor details that we have to worry about here is the idea behind this is that any container you add is going to just run. It's not going to stop. It's not going to exit even successfully. If it does, what OpenShift will do is it'll just say, oh, hey, this deployment's not healthy. Let's restart the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in general, what we try to do for all of our samples is, you know, you're going to start up your editor. It's going to come with commands that will run your tests. It's going to come with commands that will do all of those details. So you can run tests. The automation part, I'm not sure if I'm catching what the question is asking, but it's not going to be designed for you to use it like Jenkins necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And window just went wonky on me. Hang on, let me find the question again. Of course, for whatever reason, my window just went to the other monitor and came back, because that makes sense.
Zoom does that on i3 for sure.
Yeah, this is actually my browser window, which makes it weirder. So if you can start the CRW with a specified bash script, then I can at least make my own tests. That's interesting, right? Like, start the environment, plug the dev file in, see that it's running, shut it down, kind of thing, right? Like, that's kind of the interesting work use case I think Rapscallion's considering.
Yeah, that would potentially work.
Yeah.
Ping me on there's a public there's the Eclipse Mattermost. We have a channel there. You can ask questions there, and we have a quite large team working on this, and I'm sure someone would be happy to help. Depends on the details of what exactly you want to do. We try to cater towards a development environment. You could, I'm trying to imagine what you're gaining by doing it through something like this, as opposed to just running a pod or a job on the cluster directly. Unless our way of configuring these things matches up perfectly with what you need. We have a simpler way of deploying something complex, which is the dev file. And what is actually getting put on the cluster is pretty complex in that situation. But the whole thing that comes with something simple to represent something complex is we're representing a small slice of the complexity. And if you need something outside of what we represent, then it might not work for you. So that's kind of why I'm hesitating on answering this one.
No worries. I mean,
while I got this running, I can just show, this should just open up. Yeah, so this is what the registry looks like. It's basically just showing me a README file right now. And so if I run this code here and say, I think start this will work. Okay, so I didn't actually build it first. I haven't used this one in a while, and I wrote it for myself. So it's not necessarily the best documented thing, but basically the idea is if I run my application locally, it will use the other container in the workspace. This is a dev container, and this is the plugin registry container, and they're both started up at the same time and configured exactly how I need them to. We'll hit that compile and see how long it takes. Sorry, you were saying something before I kind of interrupted there.
I'm trying to remember. Chat is very active, which is good.
I'm happy to hear it. Yeah, I don't see chat at all. So
it's all
it could be an empty desert.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. Ryan, did you want to chime in here? Or?
Yeah, there's a ton of people pitching in chat. One question I had is, and there's a couple more here we can get to as well, but I wondered if you wanted to talk to at a high level, what's the best way for teams to collaborate around dev files? Is this just another YAML that I put in with each repo? Or I know you also mentioned a registry, a dev file registry. Should we have an internal registry that we share, or do I just check a dev file into each repo and then have like a launch button on GitHub, right? That sounds like an easy way to go.
Yeah.
But there's probably plenty of ways to do it. What's the value in the registry, and is that a good way for a team to collaborate?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, flexibility is kind of the goal. We want something that'll work. The registry is an option for sure. We have this built in, when you go here and look at, this is a little broken by the Zoom. There we go. Yeah. If we look at this list here, this is the built-in dev file registry. Inside this are just YAML files that define the Python stack, Go stack, Java Spring Boot, etc. You could build your own registry. You could store all your, you could say, here are the dev files we use. You could configure CRW if you're deploying it locally to use your registry. And then when you navigate to this page, you'll get, here's my team's projects that we work on. You just click on one, instantly get a workspace. The other way, which is maybe more easy or straightforward, is to store this dev file in the repo that you want to use it for. So if I go here and let's say the same repo that we were just looking at here, the plugin broker, It's a Go repo. And down here we have the Devfile YAML. And I'll zoom back in because I zoomed out. If you look here, it's the same thing that we had in the UI back in the dashboard. So this defines the sort of CodeReady Workspaces workspace for this repo. And if we actually have to go to my fork because I just fixed a little issue here that I caught. If we go here and copy this, so you can just have a badge. I don't think I put one. I don't think I put any on this repo. This is one of the repos I worked on in the past. It's kind of been complete more or less. I haven't had to make many updates, but you can put a badge because if you, I have to move that over there.
That was me. You got to do to the screen to make it work for you.
Yeah, that was me moving the sort of little stop share thing from Zoom, which was covering up my URL bar.
Love that.
So
it's always a fun feature.
Yeah, it's perfect. That's nobody uses the
no one uses the very top of their screen ever, right?
Yeah. So this is a little ugly because the sort of provisioned environment for the sandbox workspaces is a long URL, but basically you have, this is the URL to the CodeReady Workspaces instance. So what I can do is just pass in what we call a factory URL and pass in a link to a GitHub repo, a link to a Bitbucket repo. You can configure sort of authorization and stuff so that you can pull from a private repo automatically, use some credentials to do that. And what it'll do is tell me that I can't start more workspaces because I didn't shut down the previous one. But let me just quickly, yes, this is the problem I ran into.
Okay.
Forgot to shut that one down. So if we do that again and pass that URL in, it will go to GitHub, it'll grab that dev file and it'll apply it. And what we'll get is the exact same thing we were just looking at. So short of building your own dev file registry, you can just put these files in your Git repos. You can also just host the files on a server. You can, paste a link that when you load it, will load a dev file and CodeReady Workspaces will apply it, start a workspace from it. So yeah, flexibility, but I would say the ideal way is either keep your files in the repo and then you can just this isn't a great example, but I believe, here somewhere, no, we have a badge that shows up on PRs for a lot of our components that you click it and it'll start up a workspace with the PR checked out. You can click the things to run, to test, to review, that sort of thing. So the easiest way is definitely, here's a badge that you just click when you're in the GitHub UI, and it'll start up a workspace for this specific repo.
Cool.
Yeah. And trying to remember how GitHub looks this zoomed in is a little tricky, but yeah, this is the sort of main upstream for CodeReady Workspaces I'm looking at.
Ooh, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Another question we had, and you kind of mentioned testing at the end of your answer on that last one. Is there a good way to test a dev file or lint it, or just make sure that the repo is going to successfully deploy? You have any tips for automation or how teams would approach that?
Yeah, so the design of these dev files is maybe going to be the trickiest part, especially until you sort of understand the sort of rules around how it's done. So if you want to just write one of these things, there are schemas. You can, in VS Code, you can import the YAML schema if you use the Red Hat YAML plugin. One of the guys I work with on closely actually developed that plugin initially for CodeReady Workspaces and pushed it to VS Code, and it's very popular there. But there's schemas. We can lint this. We can say, this shows up better on the UI when it's at the normal zoom level. So missing property name. You can get some autocomplete here. So I can say I want to add an ID, and we get autocomplete for the plugins that the dashboard sort of knows about. I want to add the VS Code YAML plugin. What can I add other than that? Well, I can add a CPU limit, that sort of thing. So writing the thing, you'll write a valid, dev file. We have linting for that. The detail you might run into that is a little tricky is OpenShift has rules about how you run containers. And we have additional rules about how you run containers. So basically the idea is any container you start up has to be non-terminating. Usually we just do that by setting the entry point to, tail dev null or sleep infinity or something like that. Apart from that, it's kind of setting up what you want to actually run in here. Ideally, the sort of samples we have are a good way of demoing these features, and you can kind of pull from them. The idea behind the sort of samples that you see by default is that you say, okay, I'm working on something that uses Node and it's using MongoDB. Click here, you have a basic skeleton of what you might want eventually. We have the plugin for TypeScript. We have the plugin for debugging Node. We have the sort of dev container that's going to be building our Node project. We have a MongoDB container that gets started up. It's configured here. I don't know if I'm answering the question, so stop me if I'm just kind of going off on something that's not
keep going. I think you're okay.
So yeah, basically, sorry, go ahead.
That sounds that was a question from Rapscallion Reeves, who actually had to leave. So hopefully they'll watch the recording and get back to us at some point. But that looks like it covers a lot of it for me. Is there also a way to do kind of config injection or any other? I guess you could use kind of standard Kubernetes secrets and other things, huh?
Yeah.
Like
the sort of underlying thing here is that we're kind of abstracting over the Kubernetes API. So a lot of the fields that you're seeing here are coming, are mapping in some way to a container in a pod in a deployment. This is the environment. I can add command. So I could define commands like I do and change the sort of entry point to my container. Endpoints is the tricky one and the sort of thing that we're kind of improving here. You just define, I want an endpoint named MongoDB available, and we'll set up the service and the route and expose ports correctly, all of that stuff. But yeah, generally things are mapping over to Kubernetes or OpenShift. The sort of ultimate pitch is you have a definition for how you're running your application on OpenShift on Kubernetes. That's going to be a bunch of YAML. Take pieces of that YAML, put it into a dev file, and define your workspace that way, so that I know I need these environment variables, I know I need these entry points, I know I need these volumes mounted. Define those, take the definition you use for your production deployment, deploy it as a workspace, and start editing code in the same environment that you're going to be running in eventually.
Nice.
Yeah, awesome. You were showing a lot of nice kind of plugin integration higher up in this file. We had another question in the chat about whether it's possible to add plugins using the UI.
So add plugins to this dev file, or in a more abstract sense?
I think it was.
Let me double check that. Let's see.
Yeah, if we want to add plugins via the UI, if I go back and say, let's look at the Go workspace. So if I want to add ESLint, I hit this, hit save.
It says from the editor here in chat.
Yeah, so once you've actually got a workspace running, basically just showing the
from a running workspace, yes.
Yeah.
I haven't tried this in a while. I remember correctly, yes, there is a way. So Thea will look at the same sort of source. This is actually something that's very in flux right now. So the thing I've been working on for the past year is rewriting the sort of core provisioning logic of CodeReady Workspaces as a Kubernetes operator. So how we're doing plugins and stuff is kind of in flux right now. We're going to be basically the next sort of step that we're looking towards is your dev file that you use to define your workspace is also a custom resource that you can just directly apply to the cluster, and you'll get this. So that's what we're working towards. That requires us to change how we handle plugins slightly. But for now, I'm pretty sure that Thea will just go to the same registry that the dashboard, the UI I was just showing we call the dashboard. It'll go to the same source, look at the list of plugins, and go that way. I can also talk a bit about sort of what a plugin definition looks like. I don't know if there's a good way to do that unless I go, what was the plugin registry for this? I never remember.
Synthetic Moose in chat says Command-Shift-J will bring up a plugin menu.
Perfect. You know more about the project than I do.
Yeah.
This is me masquerading behind an old
I was like, wait a minute, isn't Synthetic Moose on the stream right now?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the mapping will be for you, just in case it gets a bit.
Yeah, it'll be weird on my machine because, as someone mentioned, it's i3. I have set everything. Nothing works as I expect it to. I'm a clicker most of the time unless I'm using my UI.
So if you do view,
I can't remember.
And then
edit.
Go to the view menu.
View. All right.
Plugins.
There it is.
So that'll load all the different ones that are in the
there we go.
registry, and then you can just install them into the workspace definition.
Yeah.
So this if you've loaded from a dev file, this wouldn't override that dev file in Git, but you can copy and paste into that, where you can check if it's going to change.
Yeah. Thank you for picking that one up. Yeah, I knew this existed. I just couldn't remember exactly where it was.
It has some nice new icons in the new coming update.
In the coming version, yeah, it's not this puzzle piece anymore.
Lovely.
Yeah, so yeah, I could, do this, and now YAML is installed. Sometimes you have to restart the workspace. What'll happen is if I install Java, then the next time the workspace starts, it needs a Java sidecar to have the dependencies to run the Java LSP. That'll be a quick little restart, or a long restart in Firefox today for some reason. Apologies for that. This is
no worries.
This is how it goes sometimes, but yeah, so that's installing plugins from the UI. The plugins are defined similarly as YAML files. So the other thing you can do if you don't want to go to the sort of internal plugin registry is you can prepare one of these things yourself, and the same sort of syntax in the dev file for referring to a plugin ID you can use to just paste in a URL that points at a plugin, points at the YAML definition for a plugin, and add plugins that way. So that's one of the ways we test plugins is, someone contributes this YAML definition, and I can just paste it into a dev file, start up a workspace, and the plugin is running. So try to make that sort of stuff easier.
Nice.
And yeah, I guess the other thing I haven't kind of mentioned is that we also have support so we support executing commands in these containers. That's how you would run, that's how you would say, run the app, build the app, debug the app. You can basically do any command line stuff. But once this gets loaded, I'll show you can also open terminals directly into each container, and kind of just have a remote shell on the cluster that's, let's see if I can, endpoints, no, here we go. So in the Go CLI, so yeah, I'm just in standard terminal, except the terminal is basically SSHing into the Go dev container. I can go into, let's look what we have here. So we can go into the Golang health check, and we see the same stuff that's right here. You can use this to sort of do more detailed, I'm the sort of person that goes to terminal very often. I usually don't even use sort of a Git UI for committing, pushing, that sort of stuff. I do most of my stuff from the command line, so this is the sort of thing that I look for. Maybe others are different in this approach, but I like to go to the command line for a lot of stuff, and so it's very easy to say, open up a command line into this, and you can even go and I can open a terminal into the Thea container. So this is the container that's running the sort of backend for the editor right now. Down here, we also see the other stuff. So here's the VS Code YAML plugin. Here's the VS Code Go plugin. Can open a terminal into that, poke around all we want. Fun stuff like that.
It might just be worth talking about the commands that we have at the top as well. So that you can define the dev file to make it easy for people getting started with the project. You can give that sense of order in which that you need to run commands to be successful.
Yeah, definitely.
You can define the commands themselves if there's like a set way that you recommend. So if you want to run node mon, for example, with a node project, you can all encapsulate that within YAML, within the dev file itself.
Yeah, so this whoever wrote this dev file did a much better job than I did on the one I was showing earlier, where we have 1, build the application, 2, run the application. So you can define you can define the logic for building. The idea is you're defining the logic for everything you need. So from deploying to setting up to building to testing to pushing, all of that stuff defined in the dev file. So these are basic commands. Like this one is go build. And this one is just the Golang health check, which is a file in the it's built by the application and put into your repo, basically. So you can imagine more complex things here. You can imagine start up your Postgres database and then inject this information. So with one click, you can sort of set things up for testing. And there are other repos. I don't have them easily on hand, but we have some demo repos that kind of get into this a little bit more, set up a front end and a back end and a database, and a few clicks to get everything going how you want it, and then you can start debugging your code running with a front end and a back end and all of that stuff.
So is there any way to customize the shell within CRW that you're using? That is one question that Narindev is asking. Mm-hmm. Can you switch like ZSH for fish shell, for example?
There is. It's not very easy, sadly.
Okay.
Basically, there's a component, one of the plugins that automatically gets added is the machine exec plugin.
Okay.
What that's basically doing is it's trying to resolve a shell in your workspace and kind of opening it. It's definitely something I've done. But it'll generally require building a container to do it. So when I was contributing a lot to one of our repos that is it's so much easier to contribute in this environment, I use Z shell. I sort of rebuilt the dev container to use Z shell by default. And once you do that, it just works. Right. But it's not, I can't go into the Go CLI dev container and install Z shell and switch my shell, because that'll be lost as soon as the container stops.
Right.
If you build the Go CLI, if you build your sort of dev container so that Z shell is the default, then you get Z shell.
Okay. Interesting. Awesome. Folks, if you got questions, now's the time to ask them. We're running up here on the top of the hour. Ryan, anything that I missed in chat?
I haven't seen anything else new in chat. This has been really, really cool to see, though, how this has evolved, and I can imagine with those build and run actions, those are basically just running Docker images, right? So you could kind of run just about anything in there and do really advanced integrations. Do you have anything that does active interaction with the IDE, like linting feedback or anything extra that folks have added?
Yeah, so I mean, what we generally do is for linting and stuff like that, we're adding.
There's probably plugins, stuff built in, but if you wanted something total, like I don't know. I'm imagining someone writing like an operator of some sort.
Mhm.
I'm not sure why or how, but something to do maybe integration testing and show you the feedback or something.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I think you would probably have to write a plugin to interact with Thea. Um, I've not done it myself, so I don't know the details there. Yeah, for our repos, what we generally will do is, we have the defined linter files, and then if we need a specific linter, this comes up a lot in the docs repo because it's ASCII doc and a sort of different build chain. We just add those plugins and then get that linting. For like sort of programmatically putting markers into your sort of files, I don't think we support that currently, though. You could write a plugin to do it. You can write a plugin to support that, but built in.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a whole plugin architecture for that as well. So yeah, that's a path that's kind of already outlined, and yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and if you have a internal VS Code plugin or a private VS Code plugin that you wrote just for yourself, you can also run it in CodeReady Workspaces. Get the same thing going.
Very slick. Yeah, I dropped a link to all the VS Code extensions Red Hat offers in chat. So if you're looking for particular, I want that OpenShift connector. Well, it's technically already there, I think, right?
Yep.
And then, if you need your language server, all that stuff can be plugged in. So it's just really nice.
Yeah, and it's potentially worth noting also that sort of CodeReady Workspaces is the productized version from Red Hat. The sort of set of plugins that's supported in the sort of upstream Che repo is actually larger. We do a process to vet plugins to check them and, build them ourselves and support them. So there's more plugins in the sort of upstream repo. The plugins that are available here are the ones we can vouch for.
Nice. Cool.
I hear that there's, I think, the OpenShift sandbox. I'm not sure if they have the OpenShift connector installed in there today. Have you been using it in coordination with workspaces?
So this is running on the OpenShift sandbox currently.
Nice.
This is if you go and sign up, if you go to, I can never remember the full URL, but the URL to the CRW instance is workspaces.openshift.com. So if you go here, this is basically what you will get. You can do everything I'm doing today from your browser without installing anything. I think, if I remember right, the OpenShift connector I saw earlier in the plugins list.
Yeah, I thought I saw it.
So there it is.
Ta-da.
So magic, it's there since you last checked.
Yeah,
we do releases
excellent.
every 6 weeks, so it's moving pretty quick.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that connector, is one of my favorite tools because I often log into various clusters across the planet, and yeah, it's hard to keep them all sorted out just from the CLI sometimes because they'll have a name like admin. Oh, that's useful. Which one is that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when I hit kubectx, it's like, ooh, let me go look in VS Code, right?
Yeah. There's a few things where I turn away from the CLI and switching branches and switching clusters. Those are the two.
This is awesome. So yeah, anything else?
Yeah, we're kind of winding up to the top of the hour. So if there's anything else, now's the time. I can stop sharing or I can keep sharing. This probably makes more sense in case a question comes up.
Could you talk about just maybe some things that are coming out, that you're proud of?
That I'm proud of. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not working directly on this code for the last little bit. The next step that we want to do is, if I can remember how to get back to the UI, I could show you, but this is starting up a lot of services and routes and pods and volumes and all of the OpenShift goodness that you expect for a running application. So your workspace is fairly complicated under the hood. We're working on moving that logic to an operator. And that operator, it won't replace everything, but it'll replace the parts that say this piece of the dev file maps to this sort of element of a pod. So we're approaching in the near future that transition point, and that'll be a big change, right? Because currently your dev file is just a YAML file. After the change, Your dev file will also be a dev workspace, and you'll be able to say, here's this dev workspace. And it is actually a Kubernetes resource as much as a deployment is, as much as a service is. You install the operator and that just works for you. If we have time, the one thing I want to shout out real quick, it's not available on the sandbox currently, but the first sort of thing that came out of us working on this is the web terminal operator. It uses a lot of the same logic. It uses the same component that does the terminal in your Thea workspace. But what it does is it lets you open a terminal, automatically log in, and do OpenShift commands without logging into locally, without even installing OC on your local machine. I don't think we have time to sort of get into the details of that, but if you look into the web terminal operator, I can share a link with Chris after this. But if you look into that, that's sort of the first step in the process. Your web terminal is defined by a dev file, actually. And you can,
if you're using OpenShift 4.7 or later, it should be available in the hub within your cluster, and you could just search for web terminal and install it. It's not on Operator Hub. I was a little disappointed I didn't see it there, but they don't have a console to integrate with, so I don't know how it would be displayed.
So this is my CRC instance, and actually I've got web terminal installed from Operator Hub.
Oh, cool.
So I don't know. Depends on, I'm sure it depends on some underlying configuration, but web terminal has been available.
I didn't see it posted on the public Operator Hub IO, but this is the one that's the one I'm talking about. It'll be in the internal hub.
Yes. And it's been there since, I believe, 4.5. I think 4.5.4 is when we first pushed it. And I'll hit this, and if we run out of time, we run out of time. But basically, this is applying the custom resource that represents a dev file onto my cluster. And once this starts up, this is going through a couple proxies to get to it. But yeah, so here's my command line terminal. I can look at the pods. And so, it's kind of like a Google Cloud Shell. You're logged in. You can do your cluster administration stuff from the UI of the cluster. I can pop this out into its own tab and get just a full screen terminal once it goes through the proxy. I'm having an issue with WebSockets that I have to figure out. But so I'm in here, I'm logged in as my OpenShift user. And I can do everything that I can as that user. We're hoping to push this to the sandbox sometime soon. There's a few details to sort out, but yeah, you should also expect to see this in the near future.
Awesome.
And yeah, I guess as I was saying, if we look at my installed operators on CRC, here's CodeReady Workspaces, here's web terminal. You can go through the internal operator UI and grab these and test them yourself if you like.
Wonderful.
Super cool.
Well,
awesome.
You.
That's some really great accomplishments. Yeah. Neat stuff to see.
It's been moving very fast this year. So
yeah, it sounds like it, and definitely feels like it. Just the momentum we hear about on the channel in general is just like CRW. It's great, right? Like I love it. So yeah,
the little green pips on my GitHub have never looked better.
That's amazing.
That's how I know it's moving fast.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, congratulations.
Seriously, yeah.
And thanks for coming by the show to demo it all for us.
Thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm sure David as well. Sorry. That came out a little weird, but I mean, like,
no,
I don't want to. I speak.
Totally get it.
Great to have you both here. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
So thank you all, and thank you all for tuning in. And there's actually nothing else scheduled for today on the channel, so tune in tomorrow first thing for the Level Up Hour at 9 a.m. Eastern, 1300 UTC, if I'm reading this right. Yes, and we'll be talking about we have a special guest coming, and his name is Scott McCarty. I think that's this week, if I remember correctly. So definitely tune in. Yes, it is Scott McCarty. I wasn't thinking ahead. Brain worked. In your face, brain. So thank you all for joining. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you tomorrow.
See ya.